Now, another key part of globalization is international cooperation. And generally, since the end of World War One, this has been facilitated through the creation of what are known as IGOs, or intergovernmental organizations. And these are hugely important. And the abbreviation IGO is one that you absolutely have to know. Now, the idea for these IGOs is not necessarily new, but it really sees its debut after World War One. The President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, addresses the Versailles Peace Conference with what he calls his 14 points, and one of those points is the creation of what's known as the League of Nations, which is a voluntary international community of states that seek to find peaceful solutions to international problems, prevent large scale war, and intervene in international disputes before they turn into large scale war. Now, Wilson's League of Nations was an abject failure, mainly because the growing superpower of the time, the United States, refused to join. Wilson created a League of Nations, but then because of American isolationism in the early part of the 20th century and the desire to avoid getting dragged into any more European wars, Congress did not approve the United States' entry or participation in the League of Nations. And it essentially fell apart. Now, after World War II, you see the establishment of the United Nations, which basically has been at the forefront of IGOs since the end of World War II. Now, here's the thing about IGOs. As wonderful as an idea this is, they are not without their problems. Because membership is voluntary, it's also very problematic. If a member of one of these IGOs is behaving in a manner that conflicts with the IGO's policies or procedures or goals, they can just simply withdraw themselves. And that causes basically a complete breakdown of cooperation. Another criticism of IGOs is that a lot of times they're dominated by large regional powers like the United States or Russia or China. IGOs also, because of their size and because of their inclusiveness, do not function especially efficiently, and they struggle to intervene or deal with small scale conflicts, local or regional conflicts. Some examples of where IGOs kind of fell down on the job would be in Darfur, in the Sudan, in Rwanda in 92, as well as in Serbia in the 1990s during the breakup of Yugoslavia. And there are hundreds of examples of IGOs, some of them larger and smaller than others. Like I said, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the International Criminal Court, the International Energy Forum, just to name a few of them. Now, another aspect of this international cooperation, and this is fueled by the increases in communication and travel that we've seen in the past 20 or 30 years, is international rights movements, especially thanks to the internet and social media. You see the spread of global feminism, especially in Western industrialized nations. Even though many women in those nations had equal political rights as men, they still suffered from many different forms of inequality, especially in the workplace and economically. Also, in terms of biological decisions and social equality, things like birth control, divorce, abortion. However, this has presented a new challenge for women going forward when it comes to integrating Western industrialized feminism with feminism in less developed areas. There has been a large disconnect between the two because the majority of women in the global south, while also concerned with those same things, have, I guess you could say, bigger fish to fry. They are still working towards um, other goals that are more pressing for their needs, things like property rights, economic independence, the right to inherit, um, in some cases, political equality with men. You also have international movements towards LGBT equality. You have independence and freedom movements organized and facilitated by our improvements in technology, things like the United States Civil Rights Movement, the Arab Spring, the Occupy movement of the early 2000s. It's well known that Martin Luther King Jr., kind of the recognized leader of the US civil rights movement, not only visited with Gandhi in India, but also adopted his nonviolence techniques during the civil rights movement in order to be successful against a larger, more powerful entity. Now, one of the other things to complement these IGOs is the advent of new economic institutions, right? Things like trade and economic cooperatives. There are, again, dozens upon dozens of these, things like the European Union, the African Union, the North American Free Trade Agreement, the World Bank, the IMF. And again, what these are globalized organizations with, again, a voluntary membership here that seek to provide global regulation of the market. They seek to integrate regions of the world closer together economically to reduce taxes, to reduce production costs. This allows those regions to lower the prices of their goods versus foreign and international products. Also, they help to regulate market conditions like supply and demand, pricing, industry regulations, environmental regulations. But essentially, the greater overall goal of most of these economic institutions or these economic cooperatives is to ensure that all nations are able to benefit from the global marketplace. Um, they also seek to distribute resources more evenly to prevent what we call economic imperialism, where more developed countries use their superior industrialization and their superior manufacturing base to essentially enslave less developed nations, essentially creating kind of a mercantilist relationship between the first world and the third world, although it does somewhat still exist. Two of the more important of these groups are the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. These are groups that are responsible for loaning money to the developing world, promoting solid, highly regulated banking principles. You also have the World Trade Organization that monitors trade agreements, settles trade disputes, reduces tariffs and taxes in between regions as well. But you also have regional economic institutions, things like the European Union, the African Union. OPEC is an excellent example of these new economic institutions. OPEC stands for oil and petroleum exporting countries. And what this is a global collection of the top 20 oil producing countries in the world. And they go about the process of setting regulations for the oil and petroleum industry, regulating supply to be able to make sure that the cost of oil is being priced out. Now, one of the ways that this is really influential is these economic institutions give certain regions and certain states political influence that they normally wouldn't have. OPEC probably is one of the best examples of this. By controlling the majority of the world's market for oil and petroleum products, essentially they have Western industrialized nations by the throat. They control the lifeblood of industrialization. And a really good example of this is if you have, grandparents that were alive during the 70s, Ask them about the OPEC oil embargoes of the 1970s, where lines for gasoline went miles, where the United States government had to ration gasoline, where every family had to have a gas card telling them how much gas they could buy, what days they could buy it on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is an example of a region or individual states that control a very important natural resource exerting political power over a global superpower that they would not be able to have on their own.